Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third and final Home Landscape Delight or Disaster program with Bruce Crawford. I'm Lisa Shirello. I'm your host for this evening, and we will be recording. So if I can ask you all to please make sure that you're muted and turn off your video so that we have the best possible recording we can, that would be great. At the end of this program, we're going to ask you to use the chat box if you have any questions, and Bruce will be able to answer your questions at the end of the program. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the program to Bruce. Take it away, Bruce.
Thank you, Lisa. So good evening, everybody. So very hard to believe that 3 weeks has passed by already. So I was getting a little teary-eyed. Well, not really, but sentimental. Let's put it that way. So about all this today. So anyway, today we're talking about herbaceous plants, and so we're still designing with plants. And, we're coming down to sort of the final layer, so to speak. And I just wanted to repeat these couple of images because we had these in the very beginning. And I think it's important to consider what it is we're planting for, because we're planting for us, obviously, but we also want to plant for the enjoyment of both watching the critters that are around us and so that they live on. So we want the birds and all the animals to thrive. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting to see that, not only do the oaks feed 557 species, but a warbler couple need 800 caterpillars a day to feed their hatchlings. So you got to keep that in your back of your mind as you're planting. What is it that this planting is going to do? And herbaceous does a lot of this. So there's a owlet moth on a goldenrod. And so when you look at these plants we looked at before, the purple foliage looks awesome. Wow, look at that penstemon dark towers. Oh, I gotta have 20 of those. But then you find out that a lot of caterpillars don't eat the foliage of the purple foliage plants. So, it's nice because we can enjoy it and appreciate it. It's nice, it doesn't have any holes. It's bad because it's not feeding anything. And the same thing with some of the flowers. They're beautiful, but they may not have, and I don't know anything about big sky and how much nectar it produces, but I'm just saying that sometimes the new hybrids just aren't putting out the nectar that the seedling species would do. So there's little things to keep in the back of your mind as you're planting. You always want to consider the other creatures. And this was the house that we started out with, and the whole thing is, where's the front door? Is there a front door? What are we looking at here? And so they've been doing some work, and so they've been starting to reveal the house. It's the house revealing, and look at that. There's even shutters on the windows. Wow, that's impressive. So, but it's a nice screen door, and so they're starting to open that up a little bit. And I'm not sure if this is out yet or not, but the point is they're starting to put in the garden, and that was the reason for all this. And this was the backyard, and so we're going to look at the plans for this towards the end after we finish this. But again, how do you tie together that gazebo, that deck area that's adjacent to the gazebo, the swimming pool, which is to the left, tie that in with the back door, which is right here, kitchen windows over here. How do you pull all that, the views out? We talked all about that the first day. Here's the side yard, which obviously probably needs a gate so you can get fire people in or just get people around, circulate around the building. But how do we do this? So the design process. So we've gone through the spatial. We've laid out some hardscaping. We looked at shade trees and significant conifers, small trees and shrubs last week. And today we're looking at herbaceous material. And you're going, wow, we did shade trees, small trees and shrubs in an hour, and we're just spending a whole hour on herbaceous material. But herbaceous is a huge part of the design. And it's the carpeting, and sometimes people do without the carpeting. They just throw down some gravel and say, there's the carpeting, we're done. Whereas other people really, strive to make the carpeting interesting. So think about this group of plants as the ground plane. And when we look at these There are still lines. So that we talked about the elements of design 3 weeks ago. So there are still lines being used. If you look at an ornamental grass, there are tons of lines in that. Each blade is a line. So they're either arching or they're upright or they're low and flowing. So again, lots of lines with this herbaceous plant group. There are a lot of forms, and it can vary anything from a fern-like form to a grass to a large-leaved hosta to a very fine and delicate Amsonia. There's mass to them, and and oftentimes it's through color. So when we look at dark colors, they usually have a more visual mass and weight to them than if it's yellow, light yellow, for example. So there's obviously color. We're playing with color. This is what the strong points of herbaceous material, and obviously texture. And then with the principles of design, which sort of oversee, you definitely have to do simplicity. So you can't say, I'm going to play with every color of the rainbow, every texture, so you got to sort of focus down what are you looking to do. Scale, not so much. It's useful. You're always going to keep it in the back of your mind, but even a large grass in a small garden space is not inappropriate. And so because again, it's concealing part of the design, so it actually makes the space feel bigger. So it's hard to put things out of scale if you're thinking design. Sequence is important because it could be sequence of time with month to month, how the sequence of colors evolves throughout the season, or it could be the sequence of colors within a specific viewpoint and so forth. So sequence is still important. Balance, of course, is important. And focalization, how we use this group of material to enhance our focal points. So this is, they are typically not creating spaces. They're typically decorating spaces, but the taller stuff can still create space. And there are a lot of perennials that get upwards of 6 and 8 feet in height in a growing season. So they can be big. They can form space. Obviously, predominantly for color, texture, and motion is a good one because again, with the slightest of breeze, these move, which is awesome, and we can't get that often with evergreens and so on and so forth. As I mentioned, we're looking at the ground plane, and and this is the group of plants that die the most. So point being is that you're never done. Oh, this is a great little plant. You buy 5 of them, you take them home, and then you go back out the next year. They go great through that summer, and they go back the next spring, and they're not there anymore. So even though they're called a perennial, that means that they're supposed to last more than 1 year. Sometimes the plants don't read the book and they don't get it. So anyway, it's an ongoing process. So don't feel bad if you killed stuff. It's just how the process goes. So this I always thought was interesting because I remember when I went down and I photographed this, and this was many years ago, and I was trying to capture things, and you can see that the plants here are forming space because there's definitely an aisle down there, but there's no repetition. And I always like to joke, but there's, I think, a bit of truth in this. So here's Mr. Stilby. Now, Mr. Stilby doesn't speak Mr. Coreopsis moonbeam. They don't talk to each other, and there's no form of communication. And then over here's an obedient plant of Physostegia, but the Physostegia, I'm sorry, has no clue what Mr. Coreopsis is saying. So there's no continuity here. Everybody is lonely. So this poor Coreopsis said, "Gee, it's 5 o'clock. It's time for a beer. I can't go have a beer with anybody because I can't talk to anybody." So how do the plants sort of relate to each other? So in order to make a garden communicative within themselves, so to speak, there has to be repetition of the form. And I'm sort of making a big joke out of it, but there is truth in it. And I think that if you just have one of this, one of that, one of that, it becomes a very nervous garden. And I tend to think sometimes the plants get a little lonely. So whereas if you have this, and I'm not saying this is the end all, but I'm just saying that here we've got repetition. And again, we have Astilbes out in the full sun, which is sort of a no-no, but They seem to be doing perfectly fine. Longwood does it too, so it's, it can work. But you have the repetition of that pink, and that ties things together. You have the repetition of the ladies' mantle as you go down, and again, that ties things together. You have the repetition of the white, whatever it is here, as it works its way down. So the repetition of colors gives it a degree of uniformity and calmness, because your eye naturally goes from one to another to another to another. Whereas this garden, I sort of felt that they had a catalog and felt that they had to use one of everything. And they even dived into a bulb book and pulled out a lily. So anyway, just think about that. As much as we like to have company and talk with people, I think plants, to a degree, love to have other plants in the garden with which to chat. So it's a fun way to look at it. But and here's Wave Hill, and I photographed this a couple of weeks ago. And so here, there's a lot of plants in there, and here's the Hudson River out there and the Palisades. But notice that they've got blue, 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 and there's another blue over. So there's a lot of blue repeated throughout this, and it's an aster. But the point is that repetition of that color and that plant helps to unify. It's not a sweeping mass. It's not a unified mass. There's a lot of plants in there. I mean, look at this cardoon right there. Here we are. Look at that cardoon, the beautiful architecture of that. But the point is that that's that blue color that sort of ties it all together. And then how they use the blues, because they use the complementary colors of the oranges then to sort of pull your eye to the focal point. We mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but the focalization is very important. So how do you get people to focus on where you want them to go? And so the focal point of this garden is that very central bed, which they use with the phormiums and the achmea. So so just the blues over here enhance the oranges. Obviously, this was a dahlia over here. Now this is a lot more simple. So you just go. This is down Chanticleer a number of years ago, but they had an allium. I'm not sure which one it is, but maybe All Summer Beauty. I don't think it's before Millennial came out, and last year was the perennial plant of the year. But just this simple massing of this summer blooming allium then leads your eye down to this freestanding espalier focal point. So that is very effective, very simple, a lot different than this. This is a lot more complex. This is a lot simpler, but it works. This is just the same simplistic thing. So here we have a Caryopteris. This is snow fairy lining either side, and the bench at the back, and then there's Ceratostigma plumbago underneath it here. And I picked this because I wanted to point one thing out, is the fact that we're working with line here. And because if you look at this, you'll notice that the distance between the block here and the block here seems about the same. It doesn't, typically it gets smaller, dramatically smaller as you go away, right? And then look at this. Now it looks dramatically smaller here than it does here. And the reason for that is that these lines are tapering down to a point. So in other words, they're not parallel to each other. The distance from here to here is probably about 8 feet. The distance from here to here is about 4 feet. So that forced perspective, narrowing those lines down, makes that door so much further away. And the reason for all this is that this is the gift shop at Rutgers Gardens, and we had a volunteer who took on assisting with the gift shop, and she died very sudden, and so we tried to do something to honor her. So the bench is in her memorial, but so it looks at the gift shop, obviously, but to make the gift shop just seem that it's a bigger space, a bigger volume. By doing that forced perspective, it just makes the whole thing appear bigger. So if you have a small yard in which to make it look bigger, false perspective or forced perspective is a great way to do that. All right, so back to plants. So here we obviously have no massing. We have wood chips, we have mulch, or we have shredded leaves. I'm not quite sure what they've used underneath there, but in any case, they did these large circles to prevent the trees from getting damaged by errant lawnmowers. But now we're in Central Park, and they used a ground cover for the same purpose. And so here you got nothing underneath. And here you got a place where when the caterpillars fall out of the tree, they go boing, and then they go and end up in the Eurybia, which used to be called Aster divaricata, and then they decided to split up the genus Aster, so they always make the words more difficult. But this is wood. White wood aster is native, and it's just a great plant to consider using as a woodland ground cover, a shade ground cover. Again, we tend to think, at least we tend to think Pachysandra, Vinca minor, English ivy as ground covers, of which none of them are native. Why don't we start looking at, well, what can we use that's native that will mass as a ground cover? And so this one does a fantastic job of it, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's not going to outcompete mugwort, but it's pretty good at outcompeting other weeds. So, you know, might be one to consider for your garden. So nice little native plant. Or if you're in a sunny spot, why not another aster, which they've changed the name on to Symphyotricon, but this is just a nice low growing aster. There's October Skies, which blooms obviously in October. There's Radon's Favorite, which blooms a little bit later. But this is down at Longwood, and it just makes, I think, a great ground mass. And again, effective at keeping out or reducing the quantity of weeds. So, but then you go back to this. So here, it's very calm, simple. I wore a blue shirt again tonight and sweater in honor of blue for whatever reason. But then you look at this, and all of a sudden you're like, boing, boing. Your eye just goes from one to another. Whereas here, it's like, oh, I'm so calm and mellow. I'm hyper. I'm really hyper. I don't know why. I'm hyper. So, you know, how you arrange this? I mean, you could have taken Panicum Northwind here and done a nice mass of it, and then maybe repeated a few more over here, and that would have tied the composition together a little bit better. Right now, the only thing that's unifying this composition is this hedge in the background. So yeah, something to think about. So here, obviously, new construction, and the thought for this was to create a pond at the very bottom here. And as happens with a lot of projects, the pond was engineered out, which is a very technical way of saying we ran out of money. So you know, what do? Well, what we do is we take a bunch of blue grass and we make that look like water. So so the point here is you're picking just a few plants, and a few meaning we got Panicum Dallas blues here, we got a hydrangea limelight here, we got Joe Pye weed here, Eupatorium. We've got Amsonia out here. We've got Itea, Virginia Sweetspire up here, and we got Winterberry Holly down here. But oh yeah, we got some bald cypress over here, Taxodium. But the point is that we sort of just used large blocks of plants, and so it's effective. It's easy to lay out, especially when you're putting it down on paper. It's really simple. Sweep for this, sweep for that, interlocks. Yeah. So it's calmer than that. So so it's a way of using the herbaceous material and obviously tying in a little bit of woody. Here it is looking from the top down with obviously without the glare of the sun. You can see it's the Dallas blues is blue and is giving that river-like effect. And then here as you go into the fall, the Panicum obviously, the switchgrass comes on with this pinkish flower to it. Here the limelight hydrangeas are turned pink. The Joe Pye weed now has taken on the dark purplish fall color to it. The Itea is, look at that, jamming up there with fall color. Here we got the Helianthus. You didn't even see that in the other picture, but now all of a sudden it's like it's October and it goes, here I am, look at me. And Winterberry Holly hanging out here. And except for the limelights, everything here is, well, definitely North American native, and a lot of it's New Jersey. So, you know, you can play with native plants really quite well. But so this was just taking blocks of predominantly herbaceous material and putting it together so that you got a sequence of color events. So here's the sequence again coming in. So comes in here, and then you transition to this, and even that, which you can't see here, but the sumac, and everyone always goes, sumac, it's poisonous, I can't take it. but this gets brilliant red fall color. So you really want to have some of that. So anyway. So it's, and I do like Joe Pye weed blended with the hydrangea limelight. The form of the flower repeats itself quite nicely. And anyway, I think it's cool. So, that's what I was thinking and doing. And because I was just thinking these painterly-like strokes. And then I went out to Chicago Botanic Garden and I saw some work by Ermi and Van Sweden. So if you get the opportunity to get some books by Irma and Van Sweden. The New American Garden is one of their books. Thomas Church is another gentleman who's long since passed, but he was predominant, doing a lot of work in the 40s and 50s. He wrote a book, Gardens Are for People. Great book to read, very inspirational. But it's also then good just to go to the public gardens and see things. And so you look at this and it's like, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on here. But what I'm really looking at is right over here. And what I noticed was, and I really was quite, it sort of took me back for a second, was the fact that here you have the Joe Pye weed, which is phantom. And it sort of sweeps behind the calamagrostis and you sort of lose it. And then it pops out the other side again. And I was like, wow. And I thought that's really interesting because no longer are we just doing a block of this and a block of that. The calamagrostis, the grass, always lose the pointer, there it is. The grass is here, then it's sort of interrupted by the Joe Pye, then it reappears here, and then the Joe Pye vanishes behind it. So there's now intermingling of plants. And so, and interestingly, Wolfgang, who did the planting design of the two, he was inspired by the prairies of Wisconsin. And so he looked at how the prairie plants work together and started to replicate it in his designs, and which I thought was really interesting. So then I stole that idea and did this pretty much verbatim, and had the Joe Pye weed. It works in and it vanishes behind the calamagrostis, comes out, blah blah blah. But look at the big mistake here. Look at all of that mulch. That is a huge error. So there could at least be a sedge down here. There could be that aster we looked at before, October skies. Maybe that would sweep all through here. So again, you have to, you just can't, lose. First, you're getting all excited. Well, I'm repeating this. I stole this idea. Now I'm reusing it. But then all of a sudden you forget, oh, wait a minute. I should be expanding upon that idea. So anyway, the point being is that we never stop learning. So, and this was sort of fun, sort of again repeated it, but used it with the Aster tataricus, Jindai, which is the blue flower, and again, the calamagrostis. And I like this could be a panicum. You could use northwind or heavy metal. Both of those switch grasses are native and they're upright in form. But look at how the Rudbeckia over here. So it's already gone out of flower. In fact, the goldfinches have pretty much eaten all the seeds. But this makes sort of an interesting tall grass prairie combination. So now you don't have painterly sweeps, you have interlocking masses. And look at the aster. I mean, this is still going strong into November. And look at all the plants it's feeding. So it's doing.
Can you get it? You got it. That's all right. I'll have to.
Possible, Sherman, if you could put your mute on, please.
That's all right.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. So here's Rudbeckia maxima. So you see it here. Let me go back. Here it is. See it? Ding, 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 ding. You can't really see it. There's not much to see. But this is a plant which is telling you, if once you start speaking plant talk, this is telling you that I like to be in a tall grass prairie. It's telling you that because all the large leaves are down low. And so that way they're not getting hit by the wind, which means they're not going to desiccate. It says that in order for the flowers to be seen by pollinators, I have to push them way up high because there's a lot of competition around. So the pollinators aren't able to see it. So that pushes the flower stalk up high. But notice there's no leaves on the upper part of the stems of the flowers. And that's so it doesn't allow the leaves to desiccate. This is genius engineering by this plant. And people just walk by it every day going, oh, there's a plant. But again, by itself, it's sort of gawky and upright, if gawky is a word. But then you mix them together and now you have the flowers floating on top of the grass. and that looks pretty sweet. And so you're basically doing what the Rudbeckia really wanted all along. It wanted to be up high with a tall grass. And then you have the other Rudbeckia here, Goldsturm, which is obviously much lower. And the mistake here made is that some of these grasses should be removed, and this Goldsturm should sweep back and into that mass a little bit. It would give depth to the perspective and really, accentuate the design. And, but there's the Rudbeckia maxima, and they get that tall hat. And then it goes to seed. And now this Rudbeckia is in full flower. So now we're into August, and Goldsturm is out and blooming. And again, here, something good was done here. This one Calamagrostis was pulled out and put into the mass of the Rudbeckia, but the Rudbeckia should sweep a little bit further back and in. But in any event, it's always fun looking at something you did and going, how can I do it better now? So it's fun to rip things out and redo. So anyway, there's a thought. So, but then you say to yourself, well, I don't have tall grass prairie. I got a little spot. I don't have room for all this. So you can do it on a much smaller scale. So this is the rain garden at Rutgers Gardens. This is a bog area here. So there's a liner underneath the whole thing. And how this works is there's actually a cistern under here with a pump that just pumps it back up and through. The water source is a building up here. So when it rains, it fills the cistern. And we had, and which we'll see in a second, there's a lot of cardinal flower in here, which this is early spring. So the cardinal flower is not doing anything. There are pitcher plants in here that you can barely see. So, but it is the sedge that really pulled all this together, because without the sedge, it's just gravel. It's just a wet, boggy area, just waiting for the weeds to come in. And there's also ferns in here, which haven't popped up. And Carex, get to know your sedges. They are an awesome, awesome group of plants to work with. And Brevoire is an interesting one because it'll take obviously boggy conditions, but it'll also take well-drained conditions. And you could put this with the Aster October Skies. That the two of them work well together too in a drier, sunnier location. So some Carexes are extremely adaptive. And in and amongst that Carex Brevoire, you have the Sarracenia. And look, it's coming into flower. So I was falling over myself taking those pictures. That's just an awesome plant. But then, here we are a little bit later in the season. So that sedge is a cool season plant, which means it comes up early in the season, starts to grow, gets a little floppy in midsummer as the flower stalks start to produce seed. It tends to flop over a little bit. And this is probably late June. So it's, doing its thing, but notice the cardinal flower is starting to come up, and notice that the ferns are starting to happen and starting to cook. And then here we are a few weeks later when the cardinal flower is jamming and the hummingbirds are coming in. But again, that ground plan, look at the pitcher plants, man, are they growing? Huh? Look at that right there. Oh yeah. But the point is that what's holding that composition together is the grass, that grassy texture of the sedge. So, so it's something to keep in mind as you're playing with these. You need something to sort of pull that ground plane together. And if you go out to when things get better again, you travel out to Wisconsin, go to Madison, go to the prairies that are there, and the ground plane is just a number of different sedges all mixed together. You can't really identify them until they're in flower, but they all look so similar. But it's that is just an awesome ground plane. So the repetition of form. So here it is that spiky form. So you got the grass, you've got the Culver's root, you've got the agastache, you've got the Russian sage. It's all upwards and repeating that. And so whether if you like that or not, sometimes it's just fun to repeat a given form. Even the cattails, which are hiding in the Grand Cascades Lodge, are upright and pointed. This one, again, a very pointy, upright composition with the calamint here, with the Russian sage, with the agastache. You got one dwarf blue spruce hanging out in the middle here. And also what's interesting, this is a hibiscus back here, Rose of Sharon. But so there's the Rose of Sharon. And I was looking at this one day and I'm thinking, that looks pretty good. Originally I was just thinking I wanted the color. And so blue satin is here in the middle. And and you got the Russian sage. And I thought, well, the colors would all tie together. And then I was looking at it. I was like, I really like the round with the spike. It really seems to make a nice composition. And then I realized that you could use this over and over and over again. And you always say, well, what's in a name? And so once I was giving a talk to a group of landscape contractors, and I'm a horrible speller, and I misspelled it, and I said it was blue Satan. And everybody wanted to know, where can I get blue Satan, man? What an awesome, cool plant. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I misspelled. It's blue satin, and nobody wanted it. So, so again, if you're in marketing, that means a lot for how you can sell plants. But take that and put it to chrysanthemums and agastache. So here you got the rounded form that was the Rose of Sharon, and here you got the spiky form, the agastache, which before was the Russian sage. So again, the composition, the two of them together look very attractive. Here you've got the Persicaria, which is a big, big plant, but a beautiful plant if you have the space for it. And Hydrangea Annabelle. So the Annabelle has sort of a flat or rounded flower to it. This, you got a spike. They look really good together. Oh, look at this one. Now, this is just too much. So this is down at Chanticleer last week. But here you got the Astra longifolius, and I don't think it's October skies. And then they put in the Euphorbia, sticks of fire. And this is not hardy, by the way, but they just put it in to really accentuate the colors. And now they're also playing with the form. So they got the rounded form with the pointy upright form. And doesn't that just look good? I mean, don't you need a cigarette after you look at that for a while? I mean, that is awesome. I mean, that's just a plant. So so I just love that. So anyway, again, it's not hardy, it's not forever, but it looked good that day. And then we got this. So here you got Miscanthus purpurescens. From everything I've read, that is a sterile form. And you got the Heptacodion here. And the two of these look really nice together, pick up. And then you've got all this bare mulch. Boy, that's a problem. So so anyway, but these two I thought work well together, as do these. So here's again the Miscanthus purpurescens with a late blooming Rudbeckia fulgida variety fulgida, which this blooms September into November. So picks up late season. So so again, just to reiterate, round and spiky looks really good together. And then if you can start playing with color in there with, orange and blues or yellows and oranges, it's the cat's meow. But look at how you can do this over and over again. So so here if you start and think about it, this is more waterfall-y, but it's still slender and semi-ish spiky. And now you got the rounded leaves of the hosta. And also over here, you got the Solomon seal. And over here, you got some ferns. So it's, but that's the composition. So you take that rounded and put it with slender, that works too. You do the same thing, even more, the hosta here with the Nacella, which is Mexican hairgrass, which has proven to be quite hardy for us, actually. So two of these look, I think, pretty super together. And even here, I mean, so foam flower, which I love that, great little ground cover plant, beautifully native. We're going to see it again later. And you mix it with a hosta. And so, you look at it initially and you go, well, it's got a rounded leaf and a rounded leaf, but no, it's got a spiky flower with a rounded leaf. Yes, there you go. So anyway, point overdone probably, but always try to find. And so I always, when I'm putting together a composition with perennials, the plants with the rounded, bold leaves are the sort of, and also the ones with darker colors, darker purple or something. They're sort of the anchors, and so they go in first. And so the Darmera goes in near water or river, likes shade. It's a West Coast native, but it's perfectly hardy here on the East Coast. But it needs shade and it needs moisture. And look at that. That's just got a most dramatic leaf. It's got a gorgeous flower in the spring, but that goes in first. And the darker, either where you're doing shrubs that you're going to cut back each spring, if you're doing a mixed border, or you're putting in dark flowered perennials, they go in first, and then you start to work the lighter colors around them. I just, because to me, they're they're the anchors in the composition. Look at that silphium. I mean, that bold leaf, that is the anchor there, and the Ampsonia around it is great, but it's supporting that guy. And the reason that guy has big leaves is he wants to be in a tall grass prairie again. So so he really wants to have a lot of tall things around him. I just happen to like the bold foliage because there's very little bold foliage that will take full sun. This one will. So so if you got a sunny location, you could easily use that. But look at how tall the flowerscapes are. I mean, they are 8 feet tall, and they bloom for a long period of time. They tend to get floppy too, but they need some grasses to lean on. So this is up at Cornell, and I always loved this composition. They've made it simpler in the years to come because this was actually a lot of work. There's annuals mixed in here, so there's I'm blanking. Here's a pineapple sage, the golden form of it, which is obviously an anna. There's annual. There's cannas here, Australia, which is obviously an annual. But there's a lot of perennials worked into Russian sage and so on and so forth. And there's some woody shrubs too. So, but the point being, there's a lot of repetition. It's not exact. In other words, when you look at the iris here, it's repeated over here, but it's not quite symmetrical, but it still works beautifully. They picked up the color of the iris with a variegated obedient plant over here, which looks quite nice. But the point I'm really getting at here is that you're looking at this, and this is how we typically lay out gardens so that we see them perpendicular in front of us. So, but what would happen if instead of me standing here, and of course the grinding wheel is sort of the focal point here, anchors it with the axes, if we, instead of standing where I'm standing, what happens if we go over here and we look at the orientation from along its root? It would look like that. Now that's a totally different composition, and there's no holes. In other words, here you got gaps. There's there's no there's plants there, but there's space between the color. Whereas here, all the color compresses up against each other, and you're like, whoa. And look at here, we got Mr. Pinky Winky Hydrangea Pediculata right here. So there's woodies, there's all sorts of things in here. Salvia farinacea down here, which is an annual. So it's how you orient the view, I think, is important. So I think when you're looking at where you want to lay out a perennial garden, maybe you don't want to look at it from this orientation. Maybe you really want to look at it from this orientation, just an idea. But also look at this composition. Notice how the dark purple colors really pulled together are the visual weight. That's just a $4 coleus, or maybe $5, whatever. But that coleus is anchoring that composition. Look at that, the canna, dark purple. It's anchoring that composition. Look at, I have no idea what this is over next to the canna, but again, it's dark purple. So those dark purples through there are really holding that composition together. The yellows are really light and fluffy and float. And so even the pelargonium, which is right here, the geranium, or the yellow of whatever that is there, and the yellow of whatever that is there, and here, this is probably a nicotiana, they tend to float upwards. They're light, and you need this weight of the dark reds and purplish color to bring it down. And they did the exact same thing down at Atlanta Botanic Garden. So it almost looks like the exact same coleus. And this is definitely Canna Australia back here. So they've used the same canna. And so this really anchors that composition. And again, notice there's sequence here because they're going from low to high as they go along the composition. But they've also repeated the color so that there is not, your eye moves from dot to dot to dot. It pulls it together. It's not nervous. And take notice of the spiky foliage, which in this case is a yucca. And we mentioned the other week that spiky forms attract your attention, whether it's the fact that they're going up, whether it's the fact that we think they're going to hurt us. I'm not sure why, but for whatever reason, we look at spiky. We see spikes, And the Dracaena, this is down at Longwood Gardens, one of their displays. If you pull that Dracaena out of there, there's a lot of them there, obviously, but if you pull that out, then you just have round, whatever that is with this, which not bad. It's pretty composition, but the spikes are the ones that are just adding that little bit of drama. And so the same thing here back at Wave Hill, way back in the early 2000s. I think this is around 2008. But the Fucreia here, wow! I mean, that your eye just goes right to it. Look at all the stuff you could look at. No, you look at that. So so that goes right to it. So down in Atlanta, I mean, here you got the skyscrapers in the background, but your eye tends to go to this. There's repetition of it. So again, your eye moves through with the yucca. And but you got a mass of it here because it's telling you that there is a walkway there. So so again, you use these spiky formed plants to draw your eye and perhaps your body with your eye through the garden. This is a nice combination, by the way, the Rebecca Henry Eilers with the golden sword. But here in this house, you got a lot of the, again, yucca, totally different type, but used to attract your attention up to here because it pulls it then to the front door. So a lot going on, the Calamagrostis, but it's that spikiness of this which pulls you in. So Yucca filamentosa. And again, a lot of nice soft textured plants around it. The carnations and the gora over here. But your eye goes right to those spikes. You could also put in some containers, and the container doesn't have to hold anything. Sometimes you just want to put a pot in the middle of something, and that's your focal point. And then you either, in this case, we had geranium roseanne around it, which got pretty big and sort of ate the container, but that was fine. And but the spiky, again, here you have the Culver's root, and this one I thought was fun, and this was just a total accident. But the Culver's root was repeated with the Aesculus, the bottlebrush buckeye over here. Now this is just straight Aesculus parviflora. There's a form called variety serotina, which blooms a little bit later. So if you put Aesculus variety serotina with the Culver's root, you would have spiky flowers and spiky flowers repeating themselves in a totally different forms, which I think could be a lot of fun. And it's just and here's what the Aesculus attracts. All sorts of different pollinators. So it's a southeastern native, but perfectly hardy up here, and it blooms in the middle of summer. And it's also deer resistant. I don't know why we're not using that plant more, but cool. So as we start to look at the use of this, I sort of thought we'd look at front yards, and then we'd walk through a backyard a little bit, on how to use, manipulate things. And I thought we're sort of pulling everything together here. So this is herbaceous, but then, what else we add to it? So the front yard we talked about, it's mostly a public space. It's for all eyes to see by and large. The front door has to be the focal point. You can't hide it with stuff. Or if you can't see the house from the street, at least make the entrance to the drive very noticeable so that you know where you're going. And remember that shade trees are preferable on the southwest sides and evergreens on the northwest side. So, so this is just a house. I was walking around one place one day, and I looked at this and I said, there's some interesting bones here. I mean, this is not this. It looks a little bit messy and distractive, but the point is that there was good intent. So in other words, there's a hedge here, but the hedge was sort of disrupted by the electric head shears, because when you use electric head shears, you go and you go and you don't stop to think about design. When you have a pair of hand pruners in your hand, you really think about, well, what am I pruning, and how am I pruning it? You become more one with the plant. And so there's anyway, this is bad dental work. So you want to let the plants grow together. They look better that way. Then they can't grow over the windowsill. So because as soon as they grow over the windowsill, they're eating the house. So so these need to be taken down about 18 inches down to here. Let them grow together. Then you have a nice uniform hedge going across. You have the start of a nice entryway, but you don't need these guys on either side. Just think how this space would feel if you cut these out, and left the liriope just below it. Then all of a sudden it opens up that front door and it makes it feel more gracious, that you can really enter through it and it doesn't feel as clogged as it does now. So sometimes just looking at what you got and modifying it slightly, and then maybe the juniper comes out and just repeat the liriope around through, or whatever. This maybe this is a variegated liriope, put whatever you want. But point being is that there's a lot of good stuff happening here. It just needs a little fine tuning. Again here, wouldn't it be nice if this is some place out in Rhode Island, but wouldn't it be nice if there was a stone right here? So you took the asphalt out and you put the walkway into the paving area, so that it didn't, the pavement didn't stop with the walkway didn't stop with the start of the asphalt. It actually went out into the pavement. That would really sort of blend the two together much nicer. Then you take these guys and you put them over here. So right now you're choking. So open this up and put them off to one side and go back. And then hedge has got to come down a little bit, starting to eat the windows. And then maybe you chop this first plant out and really open this up so that you have air to breathe and to greet people and to hug people. Right now it's just a lot happening in a little space where it just needs to be opened up a little bit more. So, and then for the annuals along the front, just pick one color, just do a sweep. Just me. Backyards. So this is your personal and intimate spaces. Obviously, we talked about this is your dining areas, your ground cover sweeps, or versus detail plantings, depending on how how up close and personal you are with the plants. This is where you probably put your vegetable garden, which can be beautiful, as we'll see in a sec. Ponds, pools, lush tropical plantings, or maybe you're going to do an alpine scree. You get suddenly hooked on alpine plants, and which are very tough to grow in this part of New Jersey. But maybe that becomes your push. And you obviously need your utility spaces, and you need branch piles. I mean, what do you do with the branches when they come down? You don't have a chipper, so you sort of have to make a pile for them, compost and sheds. But this was interesting. This is down at Chanticleer, and this was last Thursday. And except for the giant agaves here, these are, well, in the boxwood hedging, this is all edible. These are carrots, cabbage, lettuce. I mean, that looks awesome. Now, of course, as soon as you start to harvest, there goes your design. But the point being is that you can make vegetables really attractive. And so everybody always thinks so they have to be somehow, more ugly than they could be. So this, and they use this, actually, they donate it to several shelters in the area. So it actually does go as food. So anyway, I just thought that this was, we always think of vegetable gardens as being ugly. That obviously, kills that point. And then look at this beautiful container of lettuce. And next to it, by the way, is a beautiful container of peanuts, and which are great fun to grow. But a point is that is attractive. And so why I don't know, why don't we plant more lettuce in containers? And so if we have deer, the heck with it, just put the pot up on the deck away from the deer, and just try some different ones and make it very ornamental. And just go out and pick, you can pick from this, pick a salad, just pick off some leaves and it'll still look fine. Come back 2 days later, pick off some more leaves, and it will keep growing and look great. And again, lettuce as a fall crop is awesome. So anyway, just vegetable ideas. So this is the backyard. I don't, for some reason I lost, or I misplaced the plan. Didn't lose anything. No, I didn't lose it. So this is a residential backyard. It's got 2 large copper beech trees, which is why they bought the property. The turf was declining in some areas because the beech trees and the neighbors' trees were shading it out. It had a great deck, was ample size, but it related to the house. It didn't relate to the garden. It had a grove of seedling grown trees off to one side that were just sort of, the whole area was sort of ignored. And then it had no thoughts initially as to water feature, composting, blah, blah, blah. So you need a point of entry, obviously. So, and if you want a backyard, which the deer aren't going to eat, you need to put up a structure so you keep the deer out. So that's what this is just a way of keeping the deer out. But when you walk in and you open the doors, you see this thing, and you go, okay, there's a shrub, big deal. But the point is you want to make the garden as year-round as possible. So that's Arnie. So that's Hamamelis Arnold Promise. And that's what it looks like in the wintertime. And it smells awesome. Notice snow on the ground. See, everyone see the snow on the ground? It's cold. And so this garden is now giving you something in the middle of winter, and that you can harvest and bring indoors. And then they can see that from the kitchen window. So again, that kitchen window is really important. That's providing, obviously, and Arnie gets big. So some of the witch hazels only get up to about 6 feet tall, and they sort of sprawl out, whereas some of them get tall. And the last I saw of the original Arnold Promise, before they sawed it down up at the Arnold Arboretum, it was closing in on the 3rd story of a building. So this thing can get upwards of 25 feet tall. That's a small tree. So again, if you want to put a small tree on the site, and you're thinking, dogwood, but maybe you're thinking witch hazel and winter flowers as a thought. So anyway. So here's, there's the gate that we came in. Here's the witch hazel. This was the deck, which was existing. But again, how do you bring that deck in? So especially if you have a party, this is more seating up here. This down here is more lingering, talking, a glass of something in hand, an appetizer plate, so on and so forth. So that's, for socializing. So the two of them obviously have to connect. And then if you look behind me, turned around, there was a section of grass that was getting killed out. It was too shady. And so the area around it, this is sweet box, which if you haven't grown it, sarcococca is a great ground cover plant for shade. It takes a while to get established, but it's has a super sweet flower in March, and inconspicuous, but you just smell it. It's great. And so here's another one of our sedges. So here's Carex pennsylvanica. Oddly enough, it's native with a name like pennsylvanica. And so this is native to New Jersey and the whole region here. This is a rhizomatous grass or sedge. And you look at this and you go, I don't want a brown thing, but this is March. And then you go into May, and then you go into August. And so the point being is that this plant has never been mowed, never been touched. So we planted it, it spreads, they do edge it so that it maintains a sort of a neat panel-like look to it, tidier, but it's no water, no fertilizer, no cutting, it's carbon neutral. That's the point. And also a lot of our caterpillars and other friends can take refuge in here. And you can also walk through it too if you want. So it'll take light traffic. It won't take heavy foot traffic, but it'll take light. So it's just a great, and then look at the lines. And again, we were talking about lines before. See how it sort of looks like water flowing downhill? I mean, that's just, whoo. So I'm up to two cigarettes. So in any case, but then here we're going off to the other side. So the patio is standing on it. This little space here developed sort of by accident, and so this wasn't originally here. Originally, this was lawn, and as you see here, here's the deck, and the lawn sort of came down and around, and this wasn't its own space, and we'll get back to that in a second. So one of the programs for this was a water feature, and they wanted a slightly bigger, more involved one, and we've seen this before. So the water feature is here, and the water comes down. There's a little patio for it, which we mentioned last week, with hardscaping, which was for the bottle of wine and the 2 chairs. This is Thalictrum, meadow rue. This is an Asian species, but there's a number of native species as well that you might want to consider, because it'll take full sun to light shade, and it gives you height, and it actually rather not super aggressive, but it doesn't seed around here anyway, but it spreads. And so every now and then they have to dig a bunch of it out, because it sort of becomes a little on the overwhelming side. And then this is the hardy geranium, Biacova. And here's the Carex ice dance. So here it is this past year. You're sitting at your table, you're enjoying a glass of wine, and this is a lot of fun stuff. So the little lanterns is a dwarf form of the columbine. And so if you're wanting the straight species is a little bit too big for you, this one will seed true. And so it's great to add to the garden because it will self-sow into spots where you can't put it. And that's the point here, is that when you look at the moss grows on the rock, and then the plants seed into the moss. So that hosta seeded in, and you couldn't plant it there, but it just, so again, the point is that you are controlling. You're going to lose a lot of these plants. A lot of the herbaceous layer dies, but the ones that are happy, they tend to be very happy. So just something to keep in mind. So looking back at this again, so the point is that the grass was dying. So after a period of time, the trees were growing and people were walking. And so it was time to update. So just once you get a garden done, you're never done, point being. And so if you want to make a nice curved walk going down, and the hose is one of your best tools. And so it's, warm it up a little bit. A cold hose doesn't work very well, but warm it up, unroll it. You can see there's orange spray paint on the ground here and here, and then also spray painted the center of the walkway. And then the walkway went in, and then you lay out the plants. And when you're laying out the plants around the walkway, here's the Carex ice dance here, and then it sort of sweeps its way down into the old mass. And so you want the two to sort of continue together. The geranium, which was a big block of it over here, you want it to sweep across the walkway. You typically don't want walkways to delineate a planting. You want it to pass through a planting. And in this case, again, you had the dwarf sweet flag here, which again sweeps across the path, and the dwarf mondo grass, which that failed. So it made it for 1 year. So here it is a little bit later that season. You can see the geranium here as it comes across. 1 year later, everything came through the first winter fine. And you can see the sedges here have grown quite nicely. But this was photographed this year, and you can notice there's not too much stuff in between the stepping stones. So it wasn't killed because people were stepping on it. It was killed because there's a lot of sheet flow of water down there, and it gets too wet for the plant material. So that's a problem. So now we're walking out of that space, and this is that little area that was neglected to one side. It's a lot of seedling trees that came up. So this is Fothergilla here, which is one of our native shrubs. Oak leaf hydrangea here, which is native to down in the Georgia area, but perfectly hardy here. And this was 1 year, and you can see the repetition here of another Fothergilla in the distance. But then this was another year, and it just coincided with the blooming of a Halecia. And this is one of the things that really makes spring gardens so much fun, because there's a layering of flowers. So you go from the ground plane to the shrub level to the trees, and you can do that. And Halecias are great because they can get upwards of 50 feet tall, depending upon which species you get. And so if, again, putting it into a wood, which is where they want to be in a woodland condition, they pick up the colors down below. So anyway, just something to think about as you're layering in your garden. And then here's Hackanachoa again. So this is just a stupendous non-native grass, but it just it sort of it makes the walkway narrow. But again, this is a discovery part of the garden. So this is sort of one person walking through, or a couple of people, but they're poking, and they don't need to walk side by side. They're just sort of looking and studying. Ooh, yeah, wow, wow. So let's go down to the bottom part. And so the pond is behind me, and the little patio that we looked at is off to the left. And this is a swale. This is a sluice area. There's an inlet over here. So during storm waters, water will actually charge right through here. So this totally changes composition. There's a ring of winterberry hollies. So it sort of has a little fairy ring to it, feel. And then the bald cypress, this is pond cypress, so it's a little smaller coming up through. And, now you're walking into that woodland garden. You can see the winterberry hollies have got a little bigger. There's a stewardia here, so the camellia with the red fall color. But you can see your sweet flag is looking pretty good there. And I do love that plant. And then you walk a little further and you got Petasites over here, which is aggressive. You have to watch that plant. You know, it will spread. So you need to dig it out. And also if it's your neighboring, it's next to your neighbor, you want to be good neighbors. And then we had some Japanese primroses. And again, this is a moist area. And so, oh, I thought this is cool. Here, a little guy comes up, another guy comes up, and this is a nice little detail planting. And then all of a sudden, poof, they brought in all their friends. So, you know, but, you know, in the springtime, you don't have the heart to say no. And, oh, they're so beautiful. But in this time of year, it might be a good time because there's no flowers and you feel a little bit more courageous to dig them out and thin them a little bit. So, and again, just how things change and things grow. This is here earlier on, and here a little bit later, you can see the ginger is now starting to invade. Started out as just a couple of plants. It wasn't a very big planting, but look how it grew. And so now you're again chopping this, thinning it so that you can move it elsewhere because it's obviously impeding on the walkway. And but again, one little Virginia bluebell, perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that in an intimate garden setting like this. That little, we saw this last week, that little spot to reflect. But what it's looking into is this area here. And the inspiration for that came from the Adirondacks. So this is, I was up on a friend's, invited me up and my children up, and we were actually doing some target shooting, and we had the tin can set up here. And all of a sudden I realized that we were shooting Tiarella. And I was like, oh man, we got to go to another spot. We can't shoot Tiarella. But the fact, look at how the Tiarella with the foam flower here worked in with the fern and the grasses. It's just the cat's meow. It looks awesome. And so this was a mute attempt to try to copy nature. But the Tiarella with running tapestry is a really good one. But it's very dense. And so, but it's worked in with the Jacob's ladder, which is the blue flower. It's mixed in here. We've got Phlox divaricata back here, which is a ground cover phlox. And then we've got some Claytonia, little tiny Claytonia mixed in with that little guy right there. Claytonia is an awesome mixer. Just let it seed around. It just, and you'll have to, you know, remove some. But again, you're making, this is a nice layered composition here. So there's a lot of little plants in here. You got some Iris cristata over here. You got a trillium in bloom here. There are some trilliums in here. But it's but this is a number of years of adding and building this garden, and so it's to try to replicate nature. And here you have one of the Eurybias, the native aster. So the point being is that during this, and we're coming to the end. I know it's 8 o'clock, and someone's texting me going, "It's 8 o'clock, Bruce. Stop." So you look at this, and we started out with the spaces. How do the spaces? Where are the views, the sheds? We don't want to put something in front of the view to the front door. We want to see things as we come and we go. We got view sheds out the back door and the kitchen window and into maybe a water feature in the back. And we put the vegetable garden back here because we're not Chanticleer, so we're not going to duplicate that. Then we start to make the spaces. We start to hard line them in a little bit. And then last week we added the trees, but there was still all that space in between. And then this week you add in the herbaceous layer. And so whether it's, hostas or grasses or Canadian ginger. And again, this is 8th scale, so it's still a little coarse. And so, because, the ginger would look really good with some ferns coming into it. So we need to add a little bit of fern in there and so forth. So, so the point is that you just slowly work your way through it. What I thought would be fun here too is that this is that view out the kitchen window. And here I thought we could do a perennial border that you look, not across this way, but you look down it. So it would compress all the plants together. And so it would be an interesting experience. You don't see the holes between the plants as they bloom. So it's, so we started out with, what is your style? And that's for you to, if you haven't gotten it developed yet, it really helps to visit a lot of public gardens, because a lot of them are like Chanticleer, older homesteads, so they have a residential feel to them, and Wave Hill, certainly. Untermeyer, which is up just a little bit north of Wave Hill and in Yonkers. It's a Moorish garden actually, but very, very pretty and close by. Of course, what's your budget? That's always, but again, when you do a plan, you go, okay, this year I've got $6,000. What can I buy for $6,000 and implement and do? I want to bite off this chunk this year. So I'll do this. Next year I'll bite that off, and then next year I'll bite that. Or maybe you want to start in the backyard. It's up, it really, this is how, by doing a plan and thinking it through, it allows you to consciously make decisions. And of course, it's always evolving. And so people always say, I always love this, oh, the gardens are done. And no, they're not done. They're never done. So you're always adding stuff. And you always need to get that next thing in so that you can smoke another cigarette. I mean, it's just, you just got to have more fun with it. And the more things that you see at other gardens, you say, well, how is there a way that I could, enlarge or change minds that would do that? And if you've never read this book, read it. It's a fantastic book. It's true stories, a Yorkshire vet. And I remember I read these back in the 70s. I still remember the stories. I don't remember what I learned in high school or in college during the 70s, but I certainly remember that book. So it's Your Garden is a Story. And so I thank you. This was our little trip this summer up to Franconia Notch and so forth. And my son doing all the social media stuff there. And then just so that you know, you're going to receive a questionnaire. And the questionnaire is going to help us improve this. We would like to make this longer, more in depth. But what is it that we need to expand? And what direction do we need to go in? And so the questionnaire will be very helpful in helping us get there. So Lisa, there she is.
Right on time.
Do we have a lot of questions?
We do. We have quite, you generate a lot of good questions. So I just want to let everyone know that the survey is going to take a little while before it comes to you. So we are recording today, and I will send out that recording, and then probably about a week after that, you should see this survey that you can take part in and help us improve. So we're going to start first with a question about, are there diminutive ornamental grasses or smaller sized ornamental grasses, and how do you maintain those grasses? Do they require divisions like hostas?
So depending upon the grass, so the Hacketacloa gets up to about 18 inches tall, give or take. It can get taller if it's well fed and has a lot of water. It, by and large, I've never divided it. It's a runner, so what you're doing is you tend to remove it from wherever it ran into. The Pennsylvania sedge, I just got a text from somebody who said that, sedges aren't my fan. How come you keep mentioning them? But they're my fan. I love sedges. But the one drawback to sedges is that Carex pennsylvanica, you don't have to worry about dividing. But a lot of the other sedges, after a period of time, they donut. They die out in the middle, so they will require division. So that's why the one like Ice Dance that I showed, that's a runner, so that never needs division. It'll just sort of fill in again and so forth. So, but a lot of the grasses and the sedges will require division after a period of 8 to 10, 12 years. So there will be work involved. But there are, let's see, low growing. There's the Shempsha, tufted hairgrass, which is a native grass, gets up to about 12 to 18 inches tall. The sedges are really going to be your lowest ground plane, and I think what other grasses would be the Nacella, and if you're in full sun, Sporobolus. The prairie dropseed is a great grass for full sun and very minimal on maintenance on that one. So that's a sort of a turf replacement for sun. There's a dog.
Whoops. So I'm particularly fond of that prairie drop seed because the birds love to pick all the seeds off it. It's just funny to watch them hop on that plant. So I don't know, you had a question about whether or not there was a plant list for the talk, and there were just so many plants. So
I can certainly generate one and give it, and it could be distributed to everybody.
Okay.
But again, remember that this plant list is just a small slice of all the plants that are available out there. So, and as we've joked at some points in the past, learning plants is a lifetime occupation. So I'll still be learning plants if hopefully I live to be 95. I'll still be learning on when I'm 95.
Good answer. How do you maintain a bed with many Carl Forster grasses and Joe Pyeweed or other large plants? Do they need to be dug up and divided?
The calamagrostis is actually, as long as you don't fertilize. I mean, that's one of the things about grasses is that as a culture, we think that every season is Thanksgiving and we have to feed our plants. So if you have good soil and it has a lot of humus or organic matter added to it, it's actually, you don't need to fertilize, and that's another whole topic. But so if you don't fertilize, the calamagrostis is it can be, and the plants that I showed you are now some are over 20 years old, and they're still doing perfectly fine. So so they don't require a lot of division. There will come a point when they need to be divided. The Joe Pyeweed tends to seed a little bit, and that's the problem with, and that's why they call it a weed, because it is a little aggressive. So that needs to be thinned. And so one of the challenges is recognizing where the plant has seeded into, because lots of times on some of the projects, people don't, they're just like, oh, that's Joe Pye, we'll leave it alone, when actually it doesn't belong there and it's growing into something else. So the Joe Pye will need to be weeded. And that, it's not a big deal if you do it every spring, but if you leave it go for every 10 years, then you're going to be doing a lot of work, because you got to dig out the crown, and it's effort. So
How do you keep your Russian sage upright? It has a tendency to flop over in this person's garden.
So if the soil, well, don't fertilize, don't water a lot, so keep it on the drier side. Full sun, well-drained soils should do fine, but I have seen it flop too, but it flops usually in moister locations where it grows a little bit too quickly, it gets too leggy, too lanky, or if it receives runoff, even you may not fertilize it, but you fertilize the lawn, then the water sheet flows from the lawn into the bed and indirectly fertilizes the Russian sage. So keeping it on the sterile side actually helps it to stand upright.
Can you recommend some plants that will live through the winter that offer some color? I'm trying to build out my landscape so it looks full year round, but I struggle to find anything that isn't green come winter.
So you're looking for a color other than green?
Sounds like it.
Okay, so then go with Lindera angustifolia. It's an Asian spice bush, which the deer don't eat, but it holds on to its foliage. It gets awesome orange, yellow, fall color, but then it holds on to the foliage all winter long. The drawback then, of course, is that it drops its foliage in April, so you got to rake up the leaves in April. But the point is that it holds it all winter, and it really sounds great if you take walks in the sleet or the snow. I think most gardeners do, and you hear the snow or the sleet pounding on the leaves, and it just has a nice rustling, or when the wind is blowing. It's a great plant for that. I'll obviously leave the hydrangeas, the flowers on all winter, so they provide some tant interest. I think what else comes to mind. You might want to consider winter blooming jasmine if you have a change in grade where you're looking for something to cascade over a wall. The stems of the jasmine are green, and then it comes on with yellow flowers during warm spells in January, February, and March. That's always fun and adds a lot of interest.
Fothergilla is getting leggy. Does it respond well to pruning?
Yes. So yeah, so if you got it and it's getting 5-6 feet tall, even in the ones that I showed you there in that one garden, we do prune those down. Actually, since I took that picture. So and you don't prune the whole thing. I mean, you can if you want, but What I typically try to do is take 1 or 2 shoots and go way back down into the plant and cut them much slower so that they'll break bud, 2 or 3 feet off the ground, preferably lower. And then they'll start to grow up. And then each year you keep taking the long shoots down and sort of rehab the plant that way.
How do you deal with ticks in grassy areas? I think that was so many grasses were in the pictures.
Right. So we don't do any chemical control with the ticks, because when you kill the ticks, you also kill other beneficials. So where the Carex pennsylvanica was, the one thing that we considered doing was mowing a path through it. So the sedge will tolerate mowing. So if you wanted to mow a path, which would mean that every 2 months or so, you just have to run the lawnmower through it, so that the sedge wasn't tall and around your ankles, you could easily do that to control potential for getting ticks.
We have a huge sycamore in our front yard that has a lot of surface roots that cause havoc with the lawnmower. Can you cover sycamore roots?
Yeah, sycamore is a little more tolerant. Sycamore and red maple. But again, it's going to be an endless process, because you put the soil down, say you put an inch down, and then you'll get more fibrous roots coming to the surface, and they'll start all over again. So it's best, if you can, to try to take the plant off the lawn, or as much as you can, to reduce that. So you could put a little bit of soil on the top and then plant into it with plugs. Or someone wrote me last week, and they had a sugar maple and some liquid ambar, some sweet gum trees, and they asked a question at the end of the class, and they sent me the picture. And yes, I mean, the other plants that she had were small enough so that the sweet gum, so that if you dug a hole, it really wouldn't be disruptive to the tree, and you could plant bottlebrush buckeye or clethra, whatever you wanted underneath it.
Okay, and then we have many people saying thank you, and they're particularly fond of the points coordinate so well with the pictures to make it easier for them to understand. So lots of accolades. And could there be a class, maybe it's a suggestion, I think, of Bruce's Plants of Merit for trees and shrubs. I like the Bruce's Plants of Merit part.
That would be a long talk.
Oh, wait, here some more questions are popping up. My 10-plus-year-old limelight has very long branches. It could not support the large flowers. I cut back about 1/3 in the spring. Any suggestions to getting smaller flowers?
No, limelight, what I typically, the project that you saw, what they do is they cut it back to a scaffold-like structure. So there's a point beyond which we do not cut back. I mean, we usually take about 2 foot off each year, and then it flushes back out. So we prune it every spring. We take 2 feet off of it, and that 2 feet of growth seems to be strong enough to support the bigger flowers. Is your plant in full sun? Because if it gets a little shade, it'll get lanky. Again, if it's overly moist and or fertile, too much fertilizer, that'll push extra growth, so you want to, don't want to fertilize it. I can't think of anything else to help with that.
What kind of magnolia would you plant in a front garden, not too big, so it does not take over the entire front yard?
Well, so there's Magnolia virginiana, which is a native, which gets up to about 20 feet tall, typically more upward in form. It will, some of the cultivars hold their foliage through the summer or through the winter, or most of the winter, but it comes on with these really heavenly scented flowers, white flowers, small, but it blooms over a prolonged period, give or take a month. And so that is a smaller one. One that we used on that job we saw with the pond and so forth was Magnolia seboldii, which forms an arching habit to it. It gets up to about 12 or 18 feet, somewhere in that range, but it gets wide, so it might get too wide for you, but it's very open, so it's very transparent, and it likes light shade. So I'm not sure what the conditions are that you have, but if you have the full sun, I would go with our native Magnolia virginiana. If you have light shade, virginiana would do fine there, but so would the Sieboldii would be awesome. And then if you're looking just for a tighter, I don't know what your conditions are like, but Southern Mag, one called Bracken's Brown Beauty, is a very tight, it's not very broad spreading, and but it does get tall and big. So that might get, gets up to about 25, 30 feet tall. So that might be a little too tall for your location.
That's a beautiful plant though, with the brown southern magnolia, the brown underside of the leaves. Beautiful.
And good fragrance too.
What can I put into a dry patch, which now has African zebra grass? I need something tall that the deer won't touch.
Well, you could try yellow root if you want to go. Oh, well, the deer will eat that. That sounds like it's full sun. Well, you could do Pennisetum orientale. I've had great luck with that in dry, miserable soil. Deer don't eat it. It's a fountain grass, but there's straight orientale has whitish flowers, starts to bloom in mid to late June, and then Carly Rose has pink flowers, which bloom again from late June till frost. So that's a great drought tolerant full sun plant. You may want to try calamintha. That's again minty. Deer don't eat it. Likes dry soils. Might want to amend a little bit of organic matter in the soil for that one. Sedum, well, no, deer eat sedum. Lamb's ears I've had pretty good success with. Helene von Stein is a nice one because it doesn't produce too many flowers. The deer aren't keen on that one, so that'll do well with you. And I'm sure there's a bunch of others that just aren't popping into my mind at the moment.
Maybe some prairie plants.
Yeah, well, Baptisia would certainly do well. False indigo, and there's some yellow flowered forms of it like screaming yellow, which are shorter. So if you don't want something 4 or 5 feet tall, screaming yellow only gets up to about 30 inches, 24 to 30, but it has an extremely deep root system. And Ampsonias, my gosh, they get up to about 24 inches to 36 inches tall, but great fall color, very drought resistant, tough as nails. Deer aren't crazy about them. So those good suggestion. Those will both do well.
So the next question is similar. What might do well in a full sun, sloping, hot, bordered by rock retaining wall driveway area?
So we did the Pennisetum Carly Rose in that one, and just that type of location, and it thrived, happy as could be. Full sun, some more thoughts. You could try spireas, as old-fashioned as they are. Spirea is a darn tough plant. Try Abelia, Rose Creek. I don't know, I'm not sure where you live, but if you're up north and you don't want to pick Rose Creek, but Rose Creek is a pretty one. It only gets up to about 2 feet tall. Pink flowers, pinkish, whitish pink flowers from June till frost. Still got interest going on with it right now. Abelia is a tough as nails plant. And if it gets a little bit too tall for you, just cut it to the ground. It'll flush up again and start all over again. So it's one of those plants that was popular in the 50s and 60s. And now everybody looks down their nose at it and go, why? It's a great plant. So, I mean, yes, it's not native, but still it tolerates harsh conditions.
And I think that's it for now.
Okay.
So thank you, everyone, and keep a lookout for some communications that we will be sending your way. And thank you for all the thank yous in the chat box.
Thank you. Thank you. And if you need to reach out to me, there's my address. So please do.
Have a good evening.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.